let's talk about some of the symptoms that you might commonly see with any sort of hormonal imbalance. So, number one, you might be looking at fatigue, and this is especially important when it comes to talking about cortisol belly and issues with cortisol. You might also be experiencing anxiety, issues with sleep. You might be having weight issues, so things like weight gain or fat gain. For example, if you take a hormone like testosterone, when you have lots of testosterone, you tend to create more muscle mass. But when you have low levels of testosterone, it's the opposite. With high levels of cortisol, it's the opposite as well. You tend to make more fat, and that can be problematic as well. Other things, for example, hair might start to fall out. You might also have thinning hair. Your libido might actually reduce. You might have skin issues such as acne, and you might have issues with the gastrointestinal tract or system. Food cravings is another one. So you might find that you're craving the foods that either your adrenals need, or maybe you're really stressed out and you're going for the sugar. And issues with cognition, focus, memory, that's another big one. So if you think about the condition of perimenopause, this is one where we do really see the impact of a fluctuating hormonal system. And this is the 8 to 12 years before a woman achieves menopause. And menopause is where a whole year has elapsed since the last menstrual bleed. And what you see in perimenopause is that the estrogen, I'll just abbreviate it to OE, is doing this. It's fluctuating. The progesterone, I'll abbreviate it to PR, is starting to dramatically fall the whole way through. Okay, so you get irregularity in estrogen, drops in progesterone. You also get changes in testosterone levels, LH, and definitely FSH is on the rise. So as all of these hormonal issues are taking place, what women in perimenopause can end up with is a situation where they start to develop a lot of weight gain. That weight gain is relative to the amount of hormonal instability, but there'll also be more anxiety. There often tend to be sleep problems, And in terms of fat and fat deposition, we see a lot more belly fat. So it's quite common in perimenopause to see the increase in waist circumference. And you look at all of these symptoms, and number one, weight gain. Number two, anxiety. Number three, sleep problems. Number four, belly fat. Possibly also with the sleep problems, more vigilance, waking through the night, that sort of thing. So not necessarily getting to sleep, but waking through the night. These are all four of them, symptoms of high cortisol. Okay, so elevations in cortisol will lead to all of these symptoms that we commonly see in perimenopause. And in the research, we do see elevations in cortisol in perimenopause. And we see them particularly in the evening, nighttime. So women who are in their late 30s to late 40s will often see the difference in terms of getting to sleep at night because the cortisol levels are elevated closer to sleep time. And they might also see, if there is chronic stress, that there is constant waking through the night. It's so important, for all of you there who are women who might be experiencing this, to remember that it is not normal to be waking all the time through the night. So whatever you can do to be kind to yourself and to help yourself to get a better amount of sleep, whether that is taking, herbal supplements that are prescribed from someone like me, someone who has training in this area and has worked in this area for a number of years, or whether it is, going to learn a new meditation technique or doing some nature walking, joining community groups, book groups, and things like that. Whatever it is you can do, that is wholly, utterly justified. Spend money on yourself, buy good food for yourself, take time for yourself as well. These are all the sorts of things that will reduce the elevations in cortisol that are really common in perimenopause. This is an older study, as you can see. It looks like an older study, doesn't it? And often try to get studies that have been published in, like the last 5 years or so. It's not always possible, but this is an older study, but it's a good one. And it's, I guess, showing you that we were already thinking about the role of cortisol in fat deposition in women. So the study investigated whether body fat distribution determined by the waist to hip ratio. We're not using the waist to hip ratio as much these days. So these days we're actually using waist circumference as a measurement. So that might be one deviation, I guess, from this study. But they just wanted to see whether those changes in body composition were related to salivary cortisol levels. And the way that they measured this was to introduce a stressor and then to see whether these women responded to that stressor in terms of an elevation in cortisol, and also what happened to their mood and other things, other aspects of it. This is interesting. We're going to talk as well, might be in a different video though, about the relationship between stress and blood pressure. So stress increases blood pressure because cortisol increases blood pressure. Okay, so the stress trigger, whatever it might have been, is leading to really significant elevations in the emotional stress that's being perceived. This is also going to play a role in the development of something like cortisol belly. Changes in cortisol according to stressor. Cortisol from baseline after 60 minutes of stress. Oh, okay. This is interesting. Women with a high weight to hip ratio are at the top. Women with a lower waist to hip ratio are at the bottom. What does this mean? This group here is the lower waist to hip ratio. Let's just call them the ones that are less likely to be overweight or obese. The ones up here have the higher waist to hip ratio. These are the ones that are more likely to already be overweight or obese. And notice the difference in the cortisol response. So initially we have the stressor, cortisol is sitting up here for the participants who were more likely to be overweight or obese. They do drop, but then they have a slightly lesser drop over a longer period of time. This tells you that the cortisol is more active in the body for a longer and persisting period of time if there is more obesity or more overweight. And it takes longer for the cortisol levels to get back to a normal level or to get back to baseline. Maybe, they dropped, I can't really read it exactly here, but they dropped about that much, right? There we go. Now, the group that were less likely to be overweight or obese had a much more significant fall in their cortisol, indicating that they were more efficiently able to return back to a normal level of cortisol. And over the longer period of time as well, again, this is much more pronounced fall than the one that we see above. Yeah? So what I mean by more pronounced is that's the difference there. This is the difference here. I should actually do down, shouldn't I? Down, yeah. Let me just erase that. Sorry. I don't want to be confusing. This is the difference here, significantly more. So the implication here is that if you're already overweight or you have a higher waist circumference than is normally healthy for you, that it might take longer to get the positive improvements in your cortisol when you're going through treatment, particularly if you're doing it naturally. And it might just be that your body is in a little bit more of a stagnant state when it comes to cortisol response. And another term that I'll talk about in a different video is this concept of your cortisol responsiveness, or its flexibility and its ability to regain normality or normal baseline levels. That's really important when it comes to these things, because you might be someone who's been struggling with cortisol belly for a very long time, and you wonder why it's so much harder for you to get control over that belly fat compared to others that you might be, around. And, it's not always a good thing to compare ourselves to other people, because we always have a very unique body composition, and that this is a good example of where body composition is going to influence how fast and how stubbornly someone will develop cortisol belly. Just deleting that now. We'll just have a quick look at what's at the bottom of this study here. Okay, I think we're in the tail end of it now. It's doing a literature review there. So we come back up to the top. Let's just go straight to the results. Compared to the low waist to hip ratio subjects, high weight to hip ratio subjects secreted significantly more cortisol during the stressful session after 60 minutes of stress. That's one thing that I didn't point out before, was that the level of cortisol in the people who were more likely to be overweight or obese was already higher, right? So higher cortisol response, more hypersensitivity. Difference was not seen on the rest day. Well, the other aspect of this, I guess, is that if your cortisol is already high, is your stress response then more poor? That's what I would kind of think. Like, then it becomes even more essential to do those nice things for yourself, to really love and support yourself and your health and have lots of downtime. All subjects became more angry in response to the stressful situation. Makes sense. And the high waist to hip ratio subjects showed smaller increases in anger. That's interesting. So that would make me sort of wonder whether cortisol has any impact on anger management and emotionality. Hang on a minute, here it is. Could indicate they are more likely to evidence a helpless reaction to uncontrollable stress. Interesting. Particular physiological pattern might influence the reactivity of the adrenal cortical system to stress. In other words, saying the more overweight or obese you are, this may play a role in how you physiologically respond to stress, and it may not be beneficial for you. So think about this then also for all the women who are menopausal or approaching menopause. You probably already know that there is increased body fat gain at this point in time. So this then also could potentially have an effect on how well you handle stress and how stress affects you physiologically. So moving along, there is also a dietary component that can explain why someone might be gaining more belly fat or just gaining more fat overall. So for example, if you're eating more carbohydrates, if you have more saturated fats in your diet, then those are the sorts of foods that will lead to more fat gain. And you'll see it in elevated triglycerides on your cholesterol tests and those sorts of things. That's not the whole story, though, because there's one more set of hormones that we need to talk about. And these hormones are known as the appetite and eating regulation hormones.